This morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. We're going to begin this morning with breaking news out of the Middle East. Overnight, Israel launched a large-scale attack on the Gaza Strip. More than 400 people were killed and hundreds of others injured, according to the health ministry in Hamas-ruled Gaza, including women and children.
The attack was ordered by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his defense minister, citing what they call a repeated refusal by Hamas to release the hostages. This is the first major attack by Israel in the region since the first phase of the ceasefire deal with Hamas expired earlier this month. For more on this, let's bring in NBC News international correspondent Molly Hunter, who joins us from London. Molly, good morning. So the IDF now telling residents of eastern Gaza to evacuate. Was there any warning prior to this initial attack here? I mean, walk us through how things unfolded overnight.
Yeah, Joe, Savannah, good morning to both of you. The residents that our team in Gaza are speaking with say there was no warning, that it was complete surprise. And I can walk you through a little bit of the TikTok from their perspective in Gaza around 2 a.m. in the middle of the night. And we've got to just set the context. We are in the middle of Ramadan. It's the Muslim holy month. So a lot of people, of course, while sleeping in the middle of the night, a lot of people would have been awake as well, kind of preparing that morning meal. So striking people when they were in their homes or sleeping, of course, in the middle of the night around 2 a.m. Aerial strikes were launched in 3 main areas. So in the south, in Khan Yunis, in Deir al-Balah in the center, and also in the north in Gaza City. As you mentioned, the death toll has just gone up, more than 400 people now. And the evacuation orders, Joe, that you mentioned, that really strikes fear into the residents of Gaza, that this is the beginning of an expanded military operation. I'm just going to read a little bit from the evacuation orders. It says, for your own safety, move away to the known shelters in western Gaza City, in the city of Khan Yunis, which, of course, I mentioned is in the south. It continued to say that these areas are dangerous combat zones, signaling certainly a possible expansion of military assault.
Molly, tell us more just about the situation on the ground between this attack, also the fact that aid has been withheld from the Gaza Strip, and then also tell us how Hamas is responding.
Yeah, so for the last couple of weeks, as you guys mentioned in your intro, Israel has been withholding life-saving humanitarian aid, food, water. Trucks have been stalled at that border, the Rafah crossing going into Gaza. So when we talk about the shattering of the ceasefire, I think it's really important to give our audience the context that last night, while a fierce resumption of military attacks and military strikes that Israel unleashed on those 3 areas of Gaza, this wasn't the moment the ceasefire collapsed or broke down, that the withholding of life-saving aid for the last couple of weeks has already signaled certainly the demise of these ceasefire talks as these talks stalled. Now, there have been no retaliatory rockets fired from Hamas. We've been watching very, very closely. Lots of statements, though, from various Hamas officials this morning. You guys, one senior Hamas official, though, says that Israel's strikes were essentially a, quote, death sentence for the hostages still being held captive in Hamas. And you see this video playing out on your screen right now. You see all of those body bags. And we've been talking to international organizations on the ground as well, like Oxfam, for example, operating on the ground in Gaza, who says very quickly overnight the hospitals were once again overwhelmed. And you see this video, emergency responders trying to get to people who are still under the rubble. Right there, you see people digging. Now, Hamas says that 400, and they don't distinguish between combatants and civilians, includes a lot of women and children.
And Molly, of course, one of the primary questions right now is why? What are we learning about Israel's motives behind this attack?
Yeah, Joe, and they're being pretty open about it, to put more pressure on Hamas to release hostages unconditionally, to dismantle the Hamas government, both the military arm and the civilian arm. Prime Minister Netanyahu is under a lot of pressure from his right-wing coalition partners right now. And in order for the war to end, from that perspective, from the right-wing coalition partners in his government, Hamas must be dismantled. Hamas has suggested, you guys, in these stalled talks that it is willing to possibly dismantle the civilian arm, but not its military arm. And that is a real sticking point, I think, for people in Gaza. Those talking to our team are really worried that this may be kind of another impasse and that the attacks may just really increase.
Molly, families of hostages are responding this morning. I'm going to read part of a statement that we got from them. The greatest fear of the families of the hostages and of the people of Israel have been realized. We must immediately return to a ceasefire. What do we know at this point about the conditions of the remaining hostages in Gaza?
It's terrifying, Savannah. And actually, we did just get an additional statement from some of the families of hostages that adds to that. And they say, quote, resuming fighting will cost more hostages their lives. Now, we know of the remaining hostages inside Gaza that less than half are believed to be alive, according to the Israeli government. And given that there was no warning, certainly to Hamas or to Gaza civilians of these attacks last night, there's no reason necessarily to believe that these hostages were moved or even had the capability to move to somewhere relatively safer overnight. Savannah, Joe.
All right. Molly Hunter. Molly, thank you so much.
Well, President Trump is expected to hold a high-stakes telephone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin later this morning, aimed at pausing the war with Ukraine.
The White House says it is hoping to convince Putin to accept a 30-day ceasefire proposal, which Kyiv accepted last week. That led the U.S. to lift its restrictions on military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine. Speaking from Air Force One over the weekend, President Trump laid out some potential talking points with his Russian counterpart.
I think we'll be talking about land. It's a lot of land. It's a lot different than it was before the war, as you know. And we'll be talking about land. We'll be talking about power plants. Because that's a big question. But I think we have a lot of it already discussed very much by both sides.
You'll ask him.
Ukraine and Russia.
You'll ask him.
We're already talking about that, dividing up certain assets.
Joining us now on This is NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez and our chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel. He's in eastern Ukraine. Good morning to both of you. Thanks for being here, Gabe. I will start with you and just tell us what's expected to be on the table during this phone call between Trump and Putin.
Hi there, Savannah. Good morning. Well, the Kremlin is saying that this phone call will take place between 9 and 11 a.m. Eastern time. And as you alluded to, so much is at stake here. What the president said over the weekend is significant, where he's talking about dividing up land. That is something several years ago that would have been unthinkable, that Ukraine would have accepted such a deal. But it has really come into focus over the last several days. The Trump administration's overseas envoy, Steve Witkoff, met with Vladimir Putin late last week to try and hammer out a draft agreement. Now, the White House National Security Council says that no commitments have been made, and there are a lot of questions about what land the president is talking about. However, today is 11 years to the day that Russia illegally annexed Crimea. So there are a lot of questions. Will the president perhaps recognize Crimea as officially part of Russia, something the U.S. has not done so far? Also, the Donbass region in eastern Ukraine that has been so disputed since this war began. But certainly a lot of questions about how President Trump, he will agree to, and what Putin will agree to in this call that we're expecting later on this morning. Unclear when we'll get a readout of that call, Savannah and Joe.
Richard, let's bring you in here. You have been covering Putin for a very long time. What is the likelihood President Putin will even accept this ceasefire deal? I mean, what is Moscow hoping to get out of this call?
Well, I think we've moved very far beyond the ceasefire deal. The goalposts have been extended. As you laid it out, this initially started as a discussion about a 30-day ceasefire that, under duress, under pressure, Ukraine accepted unilaterally. President Zelensky said he's on board with it, that he would stop fighting, he would stop all military activity at land, in the air, at sea, if Russia agreed to do the same. The idea was that this 30-day window would allow the two sides to talk. That's exactly how Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, described it. A 30-day pause, stop the killing. President Trump described it in the same way, so that you could have more opportunities to work on these longer-term discussions, the borders, security arrangements. Now President Trump says that is mostly agreed on. He says that this conversation is about territory. It's about dividing up certain assets. It's about land. It's about power plants. So I don't think it has anything really to do anymore with this 30-day window. That might be part of a larger agreement, but we're talking now about Presidents Trump and Putin effectively dividing up Ukraine, and many Ukrainians feel they are powerless to watch this. And we were just talking to a soldier not long ago, and he's very worried about territorial concessions. Ukrainian troops have been fighting, getting injured, in some cases giving up their lives to hold the front line. And today they could see President Trump and Putin effectively say that the war is over, that the territory that Russia holds, or even more, goes to Russia, and the Ukrainians will be forced to either accept or reject that.
Gabe, the president has long claimed that he would be able to secure this truce between Russia and Ukraine. Obviously, there's a huge question at what cost, as Richard just pointed out, when it comes to divvying up land and issues of those types of matters. But how much of a test ultimately will this phone call be just of the president's ability to make a deal like this? And how confident is he sounding at this point?
Well, the critics of the administration say that President Trump is being led along by Vladimir Putin, who has no intention of making this agreement. But the Trump administration is arguing, as it has now for several weeks, that we are further along in these talks than we were during the Biden administration, and that President Trump has gotten people to the table. However, as Richard pointed out, if the Ukrainians feel powerless in this, someone else that feels powerless is many of our European allies who are looking at this and wondering what other concessions President Trump may give, perhaps easing up on Russian oil sanctions. So a lot of questions about how this moves forward and whether President Trump ends up giving up more to Vladimir Putin than we were expecting. But again, the Trump administration is arguing that their main goal is to stop the killing.
So, Richard, I mean, you mentioned how powerless Ukrainians feel right now. Do we have a feeling of just how skeptical President Zelensky is about this call and about what's taking shape right now?
President Zelensky has said repeatedly that President Putin is looking for a way to extend the war. Ukrainians believe that what is happening now is effectively a bait and switch. They were talking about a 30-day ceasefire, and now suddenly they're talking about an end of conflict kind of agreement that President Trump could present to the world as a fait accompli. And President Zelensky has been warning, don't fall for this. We need to hold the line. He's worried that President Trump will sign what used to be called a separate peace with Ukraine, leaving Europe struggling to respond. So there is a concern in Ukraine that this is not how the peace process was supposed to go. President Zelensky thought he would be in a much stronger position than he is right now.
All right, Richard, Gabe, thank you both very much.
A federal judge is pressing the Trump administration to explain why it apparently ignored a court order that temporarily paused deportations under the Alien Enemies Act. It was a tense hearing yesterday. District Judge James Boasberg asked the Justice Department why it refused to provide key information about flights that were carrying hundreds of Venezuelan migrants to El Salvador over the weekend. He summed up the administration's failure to comply as essentially, quote, "We don't care, we'll do what we want."
The hearing comes after Judge Boasberg had directed any planes carrying deportees to return to the U.S. on Saturday, telling the DOJ, quote, "This is something that you need to make sure is complied with immediately." Well, following yesterday's hearing, the ACLU, which preemptively sued the administration over the expected use of that Alien Enemies Act, said it was concerned about the government's apparent failure to recognize the judge's authority.
Our position is even more clear at this point. We had serious concerns going into the day that the government violated a federal court order. Today did nothing to dispel it. If anything, it reinforced that our view that the government may very well have violated this order, perhaps even knowingly violated.
So you mentioned that Alien Enemies Act. That's what this case centers on, the Trump administration's use of this 18th century wartime law to deport people it claims are part of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua. Even though the U.S. is not involved in a declared war, another hearing is scheduled for Friday.
NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos is here once again to help us break it all down. So the big question is the timeline of these deportation flights and whether they continued after the judge had ordered them to stop. The DOJ says, quote, "We believe that we've complied with the order." The sort of question of whether it was the oral order from the judge versus the written order from the judge, that seems to be what the judge is taking issue with here, right?
Most of the time, judges issue written orders, but a lot of times they'll just say words from the bench, and then the transcript kind of becomes the order. And that's why I think there's a little confusion here. But when you look at the transcript, the judge said, "Let me be clear. Planes that have already landed and disembarked their passengers, I can't order them to come back. I don't have jurisdiction over them." In a way, he set the parameters himself. And it would seem that planes that are still in the air would be covered by the order because of what the judge said on the transcript. He clarified exactly what he meant. I think that's going to be problematic for the administration. The administration can say, well, we're only going to reveal certain things because of national security concerns. But here's the thing, Joe, and I know you know this. In modern times, it is very easy to find data about when a plane took off, when a plane landed, when a plane made a turn, when a plane was in the air, and when a plane was on the ground. Forgive the crudity of my model, but this is a plane in the air, and this is a plane on the ground. And that's what the plaintiffs in this case, I think, have wisely pressed on is, hey, if you're saying these things, we're going to need some data. And they're going to make the government put up or shut up.
Part of the government's argument for not sharing some of this is they're saying it would be a national security concern to do so. What do you make of that argument?
So, as I was saying before, some of this information is already known. If you look at some of the plaintiffs' filings, they already have information about when planes took off and when they landed, whether in El Salvador or other countries. And that is why they're making that point, because when you look at the judge's transcript, it seems to me crystal clear that the judge did define the parameters of what he meant when he said turn the planes around. It wasn't limited to planes that were still in U.S. territory. It was limited, it appears, to planes that were still under U.S. control and in the air, because the judge says from the bench, look, I'm not talking about planes that have landed and the passengers are off. So those are out. A plane in the air, presumably, is still in.
Clearly, there are some serious concerns here about whether the administration is violating a court order. I assume this has to go higher up the ladder. I mean, what is next in this process?
Yes, exactly. I mean, it's already making its move to the Court of Appeals. But here's a thorny issue, Joe. If the administration did violate the order and they're in contempt, who's held in contempt? Do you hold the pilots in contempt? Do you hold the president in contempt? Can you even hold the president in contempt? Do you hold the Secretary of State? We're getting into a My Lai, Nuremberg, I was ordered to do it scenario here. So who ultimately is responsible?
All right, we'll see what happens. Thank you so much, Danny. Appreciate it.
Well, this morning we're getting a look at how President Trump's federal budget cuts could impact school lunches across the country. Now, the USDA cut $1 billion in funding last week. Some of that money was used for the local Food for Schools program that provides free meals to eligible students. NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin reports that those free meals could be in jeopardy.
At thousands of schools across the country, deliveries like this one are a lifeline. It's butternut squash grown just miles away, brought directly to the Chicopee High School cafeteria, where 2/3 of the students are eligible for a free meal.
There's no healthier food than local food, straight from your local farmer.
Melanie Wilk is the district's director of food service.
Children who eat healthier food will be healthier and learn more.
Exactly.
Part of $1 billion in USDA cuts that helped fuel millions of students nationwide with fresh, locally grown food. In Massachusetts, over $12 million slashed.
In the letter that we received, it said that the funding no longer effectuates the priorities of the administration.
This is the money item.
Forcing, Wilk says, items like fresh local meat that are pricier but considered more nutritious onto the chopping block.
Is this in jeopardy?
This could be in jeopardy.
Wilk says that's a serious setback for students like senior Nair Wilson.
Do you know of kids that rely on this? This is their one fresh meal for the day?
Yes, I know. Numerous.
And what do these cuts mean to them?
It means that they're not being taken care of, no one cares, and we're not priority, and local businesses aren't the priority. Giving back is not the priority.
NBC News reached out to the USDA and has not heard back. It's not just the students who will lose out. Local farmer Rosendo Santizo says 1/3 of his business could be impacted by recent USDA cuts.
Are you worried you're going to lose your farm?
I'm like half and a half.
An immigrant from Guatemala, now a U.S. citizen, Rosendo worked his way up from farm hand to farm owner.
To be a farmer means a lot. So I enjoy to grow food, to feed people.
You also feed kids.
Yeah, I feel like that's why I came here.
Now he fears his American dream is in danger.
I'm going to fight really hard to keep my dream alive.
So this is a huge setback.
It is.
But it's not over.
No, absolutely not. We're going to feed the kids no matter what. That's the ultimate goal. The kids will get fed.
Aaron McLaughlin, NBC News, Chicopee, Massachusetts.
A new national poll from NBC News shows that the issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, DEI, is an incredibly polarizing one in the U.S. The poll was released just this morning, shows that all registered voters were split down the middle on whether to keep DEI programs or eliminate them, but there were wide gaps when broken down along party and racial lines. NBC News national politics reporter Bridget Bowman joins us now with more on this. Bridget, good to have you with us. So just break down the poll results for us. What were the major findings here?
Thanks, Joe. So as you said, we found the country really divided on this issue, split as right down the middle, like you mentioned. And that's in part because voters in both political parties are very polarized on this. They're on completely opposite sides of the issue of the future of DEI programs. We saw an overwhelming share of Republicans, we're talking 85%, say that they should be eliminated. The same share of Democrats say that they should continue, and you see independents here siding with Democrats on this. And we also saw that the groups of voters that make up President Trump's political base, talking about men without college degrees, self-described MAGA Republicans, self-described conservatives, have more intense negative views about DEI programs, which, as one of our pollsters pointed out, it really underscores that President Trump's actions here to try to dismantle federal DEI programs is really playing to his political base. And as you see here, a pretty even divide between positive and negative feelings, with a share of voters saying they feel neutrally about it, which again just underscores how deeply divided voters are on this.
Yeah, let's go a little deeper into those issues of race or gender. How do feelings about DEI programs differ when you look at race or gender?
So we saw that white voters are more likely to say that DEI programs should be eliminated. But we did see an exception here when it came to white women with college degrees. They said that these programs should continue. We also saw an overwhelming share of black voters, we're looking at 80% here, say that these programs should continue as well. And we also saw a really interesting gender gap when it comes to young voters, young women versus young men. Young men say that these programs should be eliminated. Women, meanwhile, say that they should continue. And that also emphasizes the political divide. We saw this gender gap among younger voters in the election as well.
Yeah, that's a huge reflection of what we saw there in November. What else is contributing to this deep divide in how people feel about these DEI programs?
Yeah, so we also asked this broader question of, do you believe that there is too much prejudice in society, that people need to be more respectful, or do you believe that there's too much political correctness and that you have to kind of watch what you say to avoid offending people? And we did find a slight majority said that there's too much political correctness, but again, pretty evenly split here. And again, of course, we did see polarization here as well, with overwhelming shares of Republicans saying there's too much political correctness, overwhelming shares of Democrats on the opposite side saying there's too much prejudice as well. Again, just underscoring that voters in both parties have fundamentally disagree about where society is at on these issues.
And that is what's fueling how they feel about DEI. All right, thank you so much for joining us, Bridget. We appreciate it. We're tracking a new set of severe storms that are sweeping the country now.
We've got heavy rain and some snow that could be in store for your area. Michelle Grossman is here to tell us the very latest. Hey, Michelle, good morning.
Good morning, guys. Yeah, spring is around the corner and comes on Thursday, but we are tracking some snow, feet of snow in some spots, and also rain, like you mentioned, and some gusty winds. Winds could really increase the fire danger in the southern plains. So where you see the blue on the map here, that is where the snow is falling, and it's going to make its way across the country over the next several days. So here's our next storm on the move, our cross-country storm, bringing that snow and wind. And winds will be gusting up to 65 miles per hour in some spots. Today across the Rockies and the northern plains, we could see an isolated severe risk tonight in Iowa and also Nebraska, but that risk increases a bit tomorrow. I'll show you where. Now, as we go towards Wednesday, we're looking at that heavy snow blanketing parts of the upper Midwest, and some of it will be heavy. With the wind blowing, we could see blizzard-like conditions. And then notice ahead of that cold front, you could see some severe storms across the Ohio and Tennessee valleys. We're going to watch that closely tomorrow. That could bring the risk for some tornadoes. We're not expecting what we saw Thursday, Friday, or even Saturday, but still could see a few gusty thunderstorms reaching severe limits. Then by Thursday, that rain tracks across the Ohio Valley and then reaches the East Coast, bringing some heavy rain, especially where you see those bright colors, and also some wind. So wind's going to be a big story As we head across the next couple of days, we have 45 million people under wind alerts. Where you see the purple, that is a high wind warning, and that includes places like Omaha, Pueblo, Dodge City, Albuquerque, down to El Paso. That will increase the fire danger because we will see these winds blowing up to 65 miles per hour in some spots. Even Lubbock, 46 miles per hour, Albuquerque, 48 miles per hour. So really gusty. Along with dry vegetation, dry air, we could see a wildfire outbreak possible. That's going to be a big story today, and one that our weather unit's going to watch very closely. Where you see the pink here, that's an extreme risk, Amarillo, Lubbock, Pecos, and that is even where you see the red area, critical risk. That is the warm side. Then we have the cold side, winter alerts, a blizzard warning 2 days before spring, where you see the purple, Fort Dodge, Omaha, Concordia, and Colby. 12 million impacted by winter alerts. We have winter weather advisories, winter storm watches, also winter storm warnings. Today, again, it will be the Rockies into the northern plains. Tomorrow, the upper Midwest into the central plains. And this is what it looks like. Guys, we're going to see feet of snow in some spots, locally 12 inches, especially where you see this pink area. So spring has not sprung yet, but officially comes on Thursday. Back to you.
Tell them that.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.